It's wonderful to feel so much appreciated and loved when we come here. Thank you to the Spanish heart. Thank you to the spirit and gentleness that is the Spanish culture. It's a beautiful thing. So, the title of today's lecture is called The Flame in the Mind. The Flame in the Mind. The concept here is that if we understand how you make a fire, how you make a flame with your mind, then we will also understand the solution to zero-point energy, free energy, implosion energy, and fusion. So if we understand how you make a fire with your mind, if we really understand the physics of consciousness, the flame in the mind, we'll understand the solution to our energy crisis, the solution to fusion, the solution to plasma. So to begin, I want to tell a little story. I used to be privileged to be invited to speak at the Cherokee shaman conferences in Sunray Meditation Society in Vermont, sponsored by the famous Dahani Wahu, who was a very famous Cherokee grandmother and shaman. And actually I feel her energy as I speak her name. And one day I was doing a lecture there, and this is just incidental, but we were teaching about some origins of the alphabet work. And you know how we've taught for years about how alphabet letters make a flame in your mind. We'll play the animations later. But I was showing the Haniwaho, the Cherokee, the Native American, I was showing them the sacred letters of the Ophanim Enochian here, the angel alphabet, Ophanim. Many of you have seen this. And she said, oh, that's the sacred alphabet of our star elder ancestors, the Adawi. And so she recognized this alphabet as the origin of Cherokee from the pure geometry of sacred alphabets. It was fun, it's fascinating. But that's not the story I want to tell right now. The story I want to tell you right now is what happened next. They had constructed a circle of trees for what they called the Cherokee Sacred Council of Elders. They called it the Arboretum. And the young Cherokee shaman, who for that year had been in training to become initiated and honored as a shaman in the Cherokee culture. And they had to prove that they had learned. And one of the things they had to do was they set this little brush in front of them, and they would sit there and focus. And if they could light the fire with their mind, then they were initiated. That was their test. And we watched. Now, there's another culture that does something very similar. Has anyone ever heard the English term, the Bon Po? You know, the Bon Po master of Tibet? Well, in English, we have a term for a fire. It's called the bonfire. Do you know where the term bonfire comes from? It comes from the Tibetan Bon Po. And what do the Tibetan Bon Po do? They light a flame, a fire with their mind. It's called the bonfire. Now, when the Tibetan Bon Po, when they light the flame, they have a massive ritual. We learned about this in Calgary with the wonderful sponsor of our lectures there, Terry Willard, Wild Rose College in Calgary, Canada. And they invite the Tibetan Bon Po there, and they come and they do this massive ritual. They would bring a truckload of sacred herbs, and they would pour them into this giant bonfire. And the bonfire would be lit, and it would be midwinter, and this fire would go like hundreds of feet into the sky. It was a huge flame that would burn for days. And that flame on the land, in a very special place, would accomplish incredible healing. Incredible healing. Now, I mean, there were stories told there in Calgary, this giant ancient dragon current, and there were people that claimed to see the dragon come out of the land, and we now know what that is. That's a plasma worm. That's a charged envelope. Yes, it's a living being. Yes, it's an elemental. And yes, it's living charged plasma. And how did it get there? It was attracted. It was attracted to the flame. Now I want to tell you another story. There is a partner and friend of ours in Budapest. His name is George Edgley, and he is rather famous for carbon powder plasma fusion. And he claims that indeed he has a net energy gain when you have fusion in carbon powder. You know, Rossi and Defcalion, they're doing fusion with nickel powder. Well, Edgley is doing fusion with carbon powder. Now, interestingly, Dr. Edgley claims that the part of the carbon powder in the flame, and by the way, he doesn't have $1 billion government budget. He uses a $100 microwave oven, actually. And he puts the carbon powder in there, and at a certain pressure and temperature, there is plasma. And the plasma does fusion. And he claims there's a net energy gain during fusion. Now this is the holy grail of science, the holy grail of physics. Is it in fact possible to gain energy during fusion? You know what gaining energy during fusion would be? That is, in some way that you gain energy during collapse, during compression, during implosion. Non-destructive compression, implosion, fusion, and gaining energy during collapse. These are all terms for the same thing. Now, Dr. Edgley claims that the part of the carbon powder that does the fusion is what he calls a carbon nanotube. You know what a carbon nanotube is? It's like a helix of single carbon atoms. But you know what carbon nanotubes are famous for? The geometry of a carbon nanotube is called a fullerene, as in Buckminster Fuller. And Buckminster Fuller was actually a good friend of mine. In fact, I have to say that I learned personally from Bucky Fuller this, from what he called the vector flexor. This would be an example of non-destructive collapse. Cube octa, ecosa. Actually, there's a dodecad in there. Octa. So this is called the jitterbug, as it was properly called by Bucky. And he taught me that personally. And it further collapses, as you know, into the tetra. So you had cube octa, ecosa, dodecad, octa, and tetra. All part of one implosive collapse. Anyway, years later, when science discovered what single carbon atoms, how they like to unpack or nest, they named that structure Buckminster Fullerene after my friend Bucky Fuller, the inventor of the geodesic dome and the Dymaxion car. And they named it Buckminster Fullerene because it looked like this. A geodesic dome. Actually, a stellation of dodecad, ecosa, dodecad, ecosa, dodecad, ecosa. We call this the Star Mother kit. It's available here. And Dr. Edgley claims that the part of the carbon that does fusion is this part. So what is it about this geometry that enables fusion, implosion, the perfect plasma flame? Well, the fun part well, first of all, Dr. Edgley now with our team we're doing the calorimetry with one of the world's leading plasma fusion experts, actually, and we're going to prove, this science is advancing quickly in the field of fusion energy. But I want to tell you about the spiritual lesson here. This, to me, I would say it's more exciting than the physics, but this is the climax of the physics, is the spiritual lesson. And let me tell you what's most exciting then about the carbon powder fusion, which is, here's Edgley in his lab, and he's got these little glass balls, and inside there's this glowing plasma of carbon fusing. And it's claimed that atomic transmutation, alchemy, real alchemy, is happening. The term alchemy comes from alchem. Chem, K-H-E-M, was the original name for Egypt because it meant from the place of the blue-black blood. Blue-black blood. Enki's blood, Hermes. They were the black pharaohs. And it came to mean from the place of the bucanero, the black hole. So chem, as in alchemy and chemistry, transliterated means access to the place of the black hole. Literally, ability to make a black hole is how you transliterate the word chem, as in chemistry, alchemy. And when the early biblical scholars in the Bible, when they said, I will raise a Shem, I will raise a Shem unto the Lord, that word Shem, which became our word Shaman, a shaman, as in a Cherokee shaman, a shaman. In the Bible, the word Shem, I will raise a Shem unto the Lord. When you now read the Bible, that is your word, the altar in the church. So, an altar in a church is actually a Shem. Now, Zechariah Sitchin, he studied this term, Shem, from Sumerian for years, and finally he decided to translate the word Shem to mean highward fire stone. A firestone that goes into the sky. Literally, a flame. So, some kind of stone that makes plasma into a flame is the definition of altar in the church. Now, you know that if you put the stones in Stonehenge in the right geometry, it creates a flame of electric charge that dramatically causes seeds to germinate better and faster. So this is some kind of flame also, isn't it? It's a plasma flame. Now, the fun part of what Dr. Edgley is doing, and you can see pictures at greentechinfo.eu. Greentech, T-E-C-H, info.eu. Dr. Edgley in Budapest, carbon powder plasma fusion. Here's the fun part. This is what I'm challenging you scientists here with me today. I'm challenging you to explain this to me. Dr. Edgley is quite sure that when he has this plasma flame going, that anybody nearby that has a cold or an infection or is sick is healed. Oh yeah. This plasma fusion is absolutely, measurably a bioactive field, a healing field. You get plasma fusion going correctly, the opposite of fission, and suddenly everyone nearby is healed. Hello? Ask him. It's real. It's serious science. So now here we are, serious scientists. We need to know what it is about that kind of plasma flame that causes healing. Here are some clues. There's a famous French scientist named Priory, who used what's called a phase conjugate dielectric field. The Priori device, P-R-I-O-R-E, Priori, very famous. Tom Bearden, who wrote about it extensively. Bill may mention it after me. But the Priori device was implosive plasma, phase conjugate optics and dielectrics, phase conjugate optics and dielectrics, a flame. And in there, the French government documented in that field thousands of cases of cancer were healed, documented by the government. Elizabeth Rauscher took the same frequencies, which are called phase conjugate, for magnets, and did an FDA study, showed dramatic pain reduction inside the compression flame, the compression field. The same frequencies, phase conjugate magnetics. We can show you the equation for those frequencies later. It's called phase conjugate magnetics. Now, I don't want to get into the really fancy physics right away. I want us to really grok the meaning of this, the implication of this. And so I want to really get to this issue of how you make a flame with your mind. Because if you knew how, you would be steering tornadoes, you would be making plasma fusion energies, you would be a sun god, you know? You would be the Holy Grail, right? So, I'm asking you and me today if we can learn how to make a flame with our mind. And I'm asking you as an electric engineer. Now, here's a few more clues. You know that for many years, my partner Valerie and I have been traveling the world, and I pioneered a technology called the bliss tuner. Bliss tuner. And with the bliss tuner, we were able to measure. This is a lady in Australia having a bliss experience, and just at this moment right here, she's going, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 harmonics in her brain waves precisely at golden mean ratio. There's been a lot of discussion here in this conference already about golden mean ratio. Well, I pioneered the measurement of golden mean ratio in brain waves. This is, on the right is your right hemisphere, on the left is the left hemisphere. This is the delta, theta, this is the alpha in the brainwaves. This is alpha at around 8.5 hertz there. And you see, when these lines line up here, the computer is telling us that she has achieved golden mean ratio between the frequency of the alpha, which is here, and the frequency of the beta, which is here. There it is. In fact, maybe I'll just pause that for a moment. Yeah. So, from here at 8.5 hertz to here at just under 14 hertz, the ratio between the frequencies of the alpha and the betas is golden mean. Now, so this led me to hypothesize that golden mean ratio in brain waves correlated to peak perception, bliss, euphoria, ecstasy. And others before me had worked in that direction. My good friend, Professor Konstantin Korotkov in Russia, did a lot of work in it. So we came up with a model of what is peak perception, golden mean ratio in EEG. And it kind of looks like this. This is what your brain waves are doing. Your brain waves are making these harmonics called a caduceus, which in physics is called conjugating phases. Conjugate means to add and multiply recursively, which is exactly what only golden mean ratio allows. So you get these two, we call it two pine cones kissing noses. Did I put that animation in here? When two pine cones kiss noses, oh, here we go, pine cones kissing noses. Here's the two pine cones right here in the bottom right. Right there. You see the two pine cones right there? The two purple pine cones. Right there. Now, your brain waves are making those harmonics. And the point between where they cross, right at the center, is where you make a flame in your mind. You're creating compression. It's called a phase conjugate model of compression. You know, when you have Kundalini, you feel this intense burning fire in your pineal gland. I've been there for 30 years, so I kind of know what that is. And we now know where that flame in your mind comes from. It's called a phase conjugate model of perception. Now, as I began teaching this, I met another scientist who was also teaching that perception is caused by phase conjugation, the caduceus, recursive animal life. His name is Stephen Leha. And he said, yes, it's true that the way when you see a gestalt, the whole image, the way you auto-determine the boundary conditions, that you self-organize your relationship to the whole, the only way to explain that, he says, is a phase conjugate model of perception. Now, here's another clue. I'm going to give you a few more clues, and then we're going to try to answer the puzzle. Here's the next clue. The clue to what makes a flame in the mind. Here's the next clue. The fact that focused human attention causes electric fields to compress. It's well documented and it's measurable. This is the book. It's called Conscious Acts of Creation by one of the most famous physicists, a good friend at the time, is Bill Tiller, Stanford University. And he showed dozens of examples that when people focus their attention, it causes electric fields to compress. It causes compression, implosion. Basically, charge is concentrated in the presence of focused human attention. So electrically, we know for sure that when you're about making a flame in your mind, it causes the electric field around you to compress. Now, Bill Tiller never explained how that happens. Our job today is to do that. Now I'm going to give you another clue. There's another famous person. His name is Ingo Swann. My friend Bill Donovan, who's speaking after me today, helped me understand this. I'd like to acknowledge Bill for this part. Bill pointed out that when they found out that Ingo Swann, he was a famous psychic, you might have heard of him. He did remote viewing to the backside of the moon and discovered there's some astral parasites there. Very messy. But Ingo Swann was famous that when he used his focused attention, called it psychokinesis, that it would restore damaged trypsin enzymes, life. So he could create life with his attention. We can understand how now because the enzymes were restored to life by his attention for the same reason that seeds germinate faster in a compression field like stone. Very measurable. So, the physicists, the scientists, and the link to this conversation, the web link to this conversation, are in the web link which is dedicated to this lecture today. That's the link where all of the material from today's lecture is located. fractalfield.com/conjugating. conjugate mind. The mind that conjugates together stays together. I mean, the family that lives together loves together. So, what is a conjugate mind? So, it turns out that the scientists decided to review Ingo Swann's ability to make a flame with his mind. And they put a thermistor that was sensing temperature at a distance. Now, by the way, if you want to do what the tokamak and all the fusion projects are trying to do, but fail, all you have to do is control heat at a distance. If you can control heat at a distance, for example, through a metal container, you are the answer to plasma fusion. It's called plasma containment. It's the biggest problem out there. Ask Nassim. He talks about it all the time. Didn't figure out the answer, but he knows the question. So, to be able to control the heat at a distance means you have control of fusion. So they did some studies with Ingo Swann because he seemed to be able to control heat at a distance. So here's a thermistor instead of a flame. It's a temperature sensor. And they put it at a distance, and sure enough, he focuses, and the thermistor starts to get hot. Flame with your mind. So they said, we got to figure out how he's doing that. So they put a metal screen between Ingo Swann and the thermistor, and they grounded that metal screen. Now, if you're an electrical engineer like Bill, you know that no electromagnetic normal frequency, no radio waves, no microwave, nothing is going to get through a metal screen that's grounded. Nothing. Guess what? Consistently, through the grounded metal screen, Ingo Swann could radiate his focus and heat that thermistor, make a flame with his mind at a distance through the screen. That means that he was using some kind of wave that can go through anything. Does that sound like God to you? Does that sound like the spiritual literature about the Holy Ghost? Hello? Well, it turns out that there is one kind of wave in physics that can go through just about anything. It's called a longitudinal wave. I'll show you pictures. So, what we're saying in this lecture is that the solution to naturally centripetal wave nature of mind and consciousness is also the implosive solution to zero-point energy and fusion. The perfect flame is a fire that does not consume. If you ever studied the priests of Atlantis and their Troy stone, their fire crystal in Atlantis, they called it the flame that does not consume. You know what perfect compression, perfect fractal implosion is? It's called non-destructive compression because it does not consume. It's a flame without heat. It's a cool fire. That would be a good bumper sticker on your way to a rock concert or a rave, wouldn't it? A cool flame. So, science has a name for that. It's called phase conjugate dialectics and optics. It's self-organizing. It's naturally centripetal. And it is plasma containment. So, what kind of wave can do that? Well, there's more than two, but we're going to talk about two kinds of waves in physics here. And again, thanks to Bill Donovan and this stuff. So, most of your electromagnetic signatures are a wave that looks like this. It's called a transverse wave. Oops. Whereas on the bottom, this is another kind of wave. It's called a longitudinal wave. See, transverse waves go like this. That's transverse. Longitudinal waves go like this. That's longitudinal. Longitudinal waves, like sound waves, can go through almost anything, including the mental screen. So, here is an animation of what it would look like inside your brain. This is your right hemisphere of your brain, and this is the left hemisphere of your brain. And here are two longitudinal waves here. There are compression waves like this. Okay? Now, if your brain learns how to do this, like Ingo Swann did, then you can light a flame with your mind. Now, it's interesting that there's a simple way to prove this. Very simple. All we have to do is, when we're measuring the golden ratio in EEG here, all we have to do is prove that the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere are exactly 180 degrees out of phase. So one's going up, one's going down, like this. It's called phase discipline or phase ratio. 180 out of phase, like dancing. So that would mean, if we measured it and if we proved it, that at this point, you can kind of see it here. Let me see if I can get this up here again. See if you can see it. Right here, when the two pine cones are kissing noses. So, this wave here, the red wave on top, as it reaches where the pine cones kiss noses in the center, the one wave is going one way, and it has to meet the other pine cone going in the opposite direction. 180 degrees out of phase. You might call that getting screwed. But it actually means the way two screws cross. And the way they would meet perfectly is that, and when that happens, it would create a longitudinal wave. And longitudinal waves would enable you to make a flame with your mind. Now, it turns out that there's very few scientists in the world who know how to make longitudinal waves, sadly. It's sad. But compare that image. Compare the image we were just looking at about pine cones kissing noses. Compare that to what's called four-wave mixing in phase conjugate optics. It's just, if you arrange for lasers to meet like that, it's called a phase conjugate mirror. You know when Alice was in the looking glass, and then she noticed that the milk was not nourishing, because when you're in a mirror, supposing you're living inside a mirror, inside a mirror, the helix is going to go the wrong way, isn't it? Well, it turns out that all living proteins have a helix that goes one way only. It's called enantiomorphism. And if the helix goes the wrong way, then your body cannot absorb it. NutraSweet, I think, is an example of a helix that went the wrong way, and so your body doesn't absorb it. Well, when Alice was in the looking glass, she says, this milk is not nourishing. Guess what? She was in a phase conjugate mirror. She was in the mirror, and the helix was going the wrong way, up the down staircase. And when the helix goes the wrong way, biology, it cannot absorb that energy. And in physics, this is called a phase conjugate mirror. And when light bounces off a phase conjugate mirror, does anybody know? I will give you a clue. When my friend Bob Zawada, he taught phase conjugate optics. And when you called him on the telephone, his answering machine says, Please leave a message, and I will phase conjugate back to you in the near past. Because in phase conjugate optics, they call it time reversal. They call it time reversal when they teach it in a physics class. What they mean is that the waves return to a previous state of greater order. I repeat, the wave returns to a previous state of greater order. Now, why would that be important to you? Well, there's another friend of ours, both Bill and I work with him. His name is Guy Obolensky. Guy Obolensky in Sloatsburg, New York. And he is perhaps one of the world's living experts on Tesla. Maybe also Bill. And sure enough, Guy Obolensky built a device to phase conjugate electric fields, and you can pay him and go over there and get inside in order to phase conjugate back to the near past. I mean, in order to get younger. Oh yeah, you can buy it. It's a fountain of youth. It's real. It's possible. Yes. You can reverse aging, absolutely. It's been done in physics a long time. In physics, the way they proved it, if a bar of steel gets rusty, you can de-rust the steel by taking it back to the past. Ain't it cool? Now, there's one little complication here. As you're making your plans to get younger, I need to tell you, there's a caveat, there's a condition. There's always conditions. It could have been that, right? The condition is that you can only go back to a past where it is a state of greater order. You cannot return to disorder. That's going to be my new bumper sticker, I think. I'll put that right here. You cannot return to disorder. You know, a messy house can't return to disorder. No. I mean, I want to go backwards in time. You can't return to disorder. I want to return to my youth. Well, if your body was in a disordered state. Now, why can you only go do time travel to the past if you are returning to a state of greater order? I will tell you that's physics for sure. And I will tell you it has everything to do with the flame in the mind. You know what the real fountain of youth is? Guess what it is? It's a flame in the mind. Yeah. Now, we could do the conversation about the biomechanics of Kundalini. Maybe we'll save that one for the moment. The conversation I want to do at the moment about this flame in the mind is regarding the science of alchemy. Now, you all know that we explained that the term alchemy means access to a black hole, which means non-destructive collapse. So when the mercury thin film is on the philosopher's stone and it's turning to gold, what's happening to the nucleus of mercury to change it to gold? It's plasma fusion. It's a charge collapse. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's possible to predict very accurately the frequencies and temperatures at which you can make all of these atoms transmute into their mirror, into their next element in the atomic table. The real physics of alchemy is teachable once you understand the flame in the mind. Now, my purpose here today is not to claim to do new physics, although we can. We clearly can do new physics. We have a dozen, within our own grasp, at least a dozen technologies, and Bill is going to show you pictures today where we understand the electrical engineering of a dozen or more different zero-point energy sources. Actually, from an electrical engineering standpoint, doing the hardware to make the zero-point energy is the easy part. Really, it's the easy part. You know what the hard part is? The hard part is the education so that we can use this in a self-empowered way. Because only if we understand the principle behind it can we use it without it destroying us. So our job is to understand plasma fusion in a way that teaches us the principle. Otherwise, we will be disempowered. Practical example, the famous Joe cell, and to some extent the Brown's gas. We now know that the hydrogen atom for the hydrolysis, which is the center of the Joe cell and Brown's gas, I wrote the equation to prove that the radius of hydrogen equals Planck length times exact multiples of golden ratio. That was not known until I wrote the new equation. goldenmean.info/golden proof. Now, that means that the hydrogen atom arrangement of electron shells is exactly this. This is literally a model of the radii, dodeca, ecosa, dodeca, golden ratio, golden ratio, golden ratio. This is how hydrogen works. This is how the sun's heart works. This is the geometry of carbon fusion. Oh, and did you know that the center bond of every rung on the ladder of DNA is hydrogen? So what's going down the zipper of your DNA when you unzip and zip up your DNA, the center? Hydrogen. Guess what the catalyst for the carbon powder fusion is? Hydrogen. Guess what the geometry of hydrogen is? Pure, implosive, three-dimensional fractal fusion geometry. So, the fusion in the center of the sun is similar to the fusion in the center of your DNA. Now, there's another story that goes with this. And this story is called Fusion in the Blood. And for this also I want to acknowledge my friend Bill Donovan, who is speaking next. We know that inside your body, atoms are being transmuted. It has been proven. The famous French chemist, biologist, Louis Kevron, showed the African miners were synthesizing potassium or phosphorus, and they showed that chickens can manufacture calcium from other atoms. There's many, many well-documented examples that atomic transmutation happens inside your body. Cold fusion inside your body. Well known. Now, Bill says that one of the atoms which is transmuted in your body is magnesium. I think, was it magnesium, Bill? Yeah. And this is one of my excuses for eating dark chocolate, actually. Because dark chocolate is rich in magnesium. And so I'm feeding the fusion in my blood. There's my excuse. Everyone needs some addiction. You know, I was doing a lecture about addiction one day, and being very critical of people who were addicted to drugs, etc. And one very young person in the audience said, "No, you're addicted to food." I said, "Ooh, I guess I am addicted." So, the point is that fusion does happen in the blood. Now, we know a lot about how the fusion is happening in the blood. First, we're going to look at the geometry of DNA to understand fusion in the blood. Most of you remember from earlier lectures that I have done the way DNA is measurably affected by human bliss. Remember, here we have the famous story, your heart harmonics. This is the electric field that causes your heart to fire. And this is the fractal, harmonic, inclusive heart, the frequencies in your heart. And when the frequencies are inclusive, phase coherent, there's more donuts, more implosion in the heart, which is called a fractal heart, is a healthy heart. So that means the short wave is embedded inside the long wave in your heart. It's called perfect nesting or perfect embedding. And this is the way Feng Shui is taught, and this is the way heart harmonics is taught, or a fractal heart, or a healthy heart. It's simply this, that when the long wave, well, fits on the short wave, or you could say, when the short wave fits perfectly inside the long wave, it's called embedding or nesting. I think you would call it sitting comfortably in the mind of God. Perfect nesting. So what happens in your DNA is, this is measurable now, it's been measured, that when your heart harmonics nest coherently, it causes the short wave to embed recursively in the long wave, and actually increases the amount of braiding in your DNA. Now, we've been teaching this story for 20 years. We know the DNA braids recursively. The thread is braided into string. The string is braided into rope. The rope is braided into very thick, fat rope. We say the plot is thickening. Your DNA gets thicker. Well, eventually, this braiding in your DNA, like a Celtic knot, appears to pelastrate. Pelastrate, which means to turn inside out. I would turn myself inside out for you, darling, DNA said. And this turning inside out means the DNA becomes a big donut. There's a picture of DNA in a torus, in a donut. So in the center of that, DNA becomes toroidal. This is actually a photomicrograph right here of DNA in a torus, in a donut, just like this. Now, there's one more really fun part of the story of Dr. George Edgley that I wanted to tell you about. The other half of his website is about his hobby, which is studying ball lightning. Are any of you familiar with ball lightning? Have you heard of ball lightning? Sometimes lightning comes in a house, and it turns from a bolt of lightning. When the lightning beams cross, the lightning turns into a ball, like this. Now, the thing that's really interesting when ball lightning forms is that there are documented stories that people can talk to ball lightning. Documented stories. In other words, here's the ball lightning comes in the room, somebody's having telepathy with their ball lightning, and they say, if you can hear me, go over there. The ball lightning is over there. If you can, right? It's well known that if you're the least bit telepathic or psychic, you can talk to ball lightning. Anybody know why? Why is it that ball lightning is telepathic? Ball lightning is like a photon. It's a donut. And in the center of the donut, there's a convergence in place. Harmonic convergence. At the center of the donut, where the plasma converges, it makes a kind of plasma radio. Telepathy. Remember we were talking about Dr. Korotkov from Russia? He was following the Kogi to where they go to make phone calls to their ancestors, the shaman of this South American sacred tribe. And where they go to telephone their ancestors, he measured the electricity of the air, the charge, and he called it fractal air. And what he meant was, electrically, the place where you can telephone your ancestors is a place where charge distribution is perfect. Now the way he measured that, we have three ways to measure that. But basically, in biological living architecture, you need to be able to measure whether the air is fractal. So, here it is. If you put a condenser under a tree, the condenser, the capacitor, in a sacred space under a sacred tree here, the electric field is very able to unpack. Charge distribution is invited. You can do a lot of physics around this, as Dr. Korotkov has, and you can show that you can consistently measure whether the space is sacred simply by whether the air, the air in the space is charged radiant. Whereas if you take the same device and put it inside a metal building, the electric field is trapped here. It cannot unpack. So this is the place electrically measured where it is possible to lucid dream. Circle of trees, stone circle, sacred architecture. It is also possible there to have successful birth and death. I repeat, it is also possible there to have successful birth and death for the exact electrical reason you call that sacred space. Whereas over here on this side, where the charged radiance is trapped, the electric field cannot get out. Waves of capacitive charge are not able to unpack. This space is the opposite of sacred. Here, you cannot phone your ancestors. This was measured in a metal building. Do not send your children to steel and aluminum buildings for school. It is not okay for this electric reason. Now, to understand this principle a little bit better, why is birth and death and lucid dreaming and phone calls to ancestors, why is this only possible in sacred space? And at our website, goldenmean.info/architecture, we show 3 different ways to measure sacred space. Sacred space is very teachable in electrical engineering. We use a gold char, a little buzz, the same physics of why a king wears a gold crown, because it allows his aura to unpack. And that's the physics of how a king inhabits his kingdom. Arthur and the land are one. It means that to be the royal blood, you need to be the one whose charge is radiant enough to inhabit your kingdom, in the sense that you are the centripetal force that holds the land together. Now, the ability to lucid dream and the ability to take memory through death actually requires the understanding of what is the electrical engineering of heaven. Heaven. How do you say heaven in Spanish? Cielo. Thank you. Cielo. Like sky in French. So the sky is heaven. Okay, all right. Well, famous author Lawrence Gardner was, in his book, The Sacred Ark, he was analyzing the electric field of white gold powder, sometimes called mana, or ormes, or the spice, monoatomic gold, which later was called Holy Communion in church. He was analyzing the electric field. It turns out that the gold atom in the monoatomic state, the proton, the nuclear symmetry is doing this, and the electron symmetry is doing this. And the gold atom makes an electric field when it's white gold powder that produces gravity. White gold powder has been known to float. And your ancestors were eating the gold, the white gold powder, because they thought it would make them immortal, actually. That's how it became known as Holy Communion. And it was served, by the way, in a pine cone-shaped wafer that you can see the carvings at Red Chateau in France of the white gold powder. So, Lawrence Gardner, in his book Sacred Ark, is analyzing the electric field, and he decided that because the electric field of the monoatomic gold is so huge, it makes an almost infinite electric field. And it's called, by the way, the same thing, it's called phase conjugate dielectric. And because that electric field is so big, so perfect, so distributed like a rose. You know the rose of Sharon in the Jewish tradition? Well, it turns out that in the Hebrew tradition, the name for heaven is called the Plains of Sharon. The Plains of Sharon. And according to his very, very scholarly analysis, the electric definition of the Plains of Sharon, an example of that is a perfectly unpacked electron. So, when I go to heaven, I'm going to be a perfectly unpacked electron. Doesn't that sound delightful? It's another way of saying to become a wave that's perfectly distributed. In English, the word for heaven comes from He, Ave, heaven. He, Ave, heaven. He means the breath of charge. Ave means to take flight, to take wing. Ave, to fly. Avion. Avion sounds Spanish to me. So, He, Ave, where the breath of charge takes flight, where charge can fly. Right? Remember how angry the Hopi grandfathers were when the U.S. government decided to put steel pipes in the old Oribe, the sacred burial ground of the Hopi. Why were the Hopi so angry that the U.S. government decided to put steel pipes, sewage, across the sacred burial ground? What did the Hopi ancestor know that the U.S. government did not know? The Hopi ancestor knew that the circulation of charge in that burial ground was fractal, phase conjugate, like a rose. And the only way ancestors live in memory is if that charge remains in circulation. Yes. And steel pipes and steel buildings and aluminum and electrosmog, these are poisonous to the distribution of all living plasma, all living memory, for the very simple reason that the electric field that goes, the electric field you call life, I call phase conjugate, Li-5. Life. Life. The electric field you call life has to unpack like a rose. What does that mean in practice? It means you go to your bed, your house, your garden, and your city, and you rearrange the magnetic lines to look like a rose. The magnetic map of Prague originally is a rose. It's a meteor caldera. And when we get to Prague, Valerie noticed that we were lucid dreaming more. Why could we lucid dream better in Prague? The magnetic map is a rose. Oh, by the way, Prague is successful at attracting life force, tourists, energy, and money. So you could tell the Spanish government, if they want money back in Spain, rearrange the magnetic map to be attracting charge. Because the circulation of living charge is the human energy for which money is the only symbol. Right? So, this ability to make magnetism circulate successfully translates into very practical suggestions for your day-to-day life. Have you been to Switzerland in the mountains where you have the old-fashioned house that's made of clay and natural materials and straw, all living biologic materials? And in many of those houses, there's a hole in the roof that points in the direction of a certain star. And they say, that's where grandmother goes out when she dies. Yeah? Same where the tube that points to Sirius from the Great Pyramid. Same principle. Now, you know, in Australia, I think they found out that houses with metal roof, you can't dream as well. Why does a steel or metal over your head reduce your ability to dream? Do you know? Well, we have some clues. In Australia, where the Aboriginals, let's see, we'll use this one, they found out that the place the Aboriginals call dreaming track or songline in Australia is actually measurable as a magnetic line. So that the ability to, so they were studying what were called songlines in the Australian Aboriginal tradition. Gotta find that picture now. There it is. It's from our friend Rob Gourlay in Australia. These are the white lines here in white, are the songline, the dreaming track. And the way the electrical engineers measure songline or dreaming track here in white, they do it from airplane and satellite magnetic flux permissivity, which is simply where rivers of magnetism are flowing in the land, magnetic conductivity, like the white lines, accurately identify what Aboriginals call dreaming track or songline. So, what's the physics? Why would you need a magnetic river for propagating your dreaming? Does anybody have a clue? Another prediction that spiritual scientists always say is that if you can lucid dream, you will take memory with you when you die. But if you cannot lucid dream, you will take less memory with you when you die. So lucid dreaming has something to do with memory, coherence of plasma. In Egyptian, the term for that is the origin of the term Catholic and Cathar. It was called your Ka in Egypt, K-A, which means your boat into the underworld. So if you get a coherent aura, then your plasma, your charge, can take wings, hey ave, to fly, and your magnetic plasma can go down the river, the river of magnetic conduction. Now, if the magnetic map of your bed and your house look like a rose, imagine how easy it is for birth and death and dreaming. Whereas if the magnetic map of your bed is a steel and aluminum building full of dead air and electrosmog, I tell you, you have a problem. It's the life force in the air itself that allows the charge to propagate. Hey ave, plains of Sharon. Your breath of charge takes wings. I feel like I'm in heaven now. You see the principle? So this is just an introduction to the curriculum of living architecture and the alchemy of the flame in the mind. Let's see, what time is it? It's 6 o'clock. Before we go further, can we do questions here? Would anyone want to ask questions? Should we have some dialogue? Spontaneity? Anyone? Aren't ready for that. Well, if you have questions, feel free. The climax of this lecture is going to be about applying this to technology, to sacred space, to living agriculture, to living architecture. And I'm going to show you a presentation which is called the Fractal Field Team here, which has examples of things we're doing to create sacred space in practical terms. These are the websites, fractalfield.com, breakthroughtechnologies.com, theimploder.com, purify.com. And Breakthrough Technologies, and also bloomthedesert.com, those two websites are in conjunction with Roger Green, who is here with us, who works on all these projects with us, and he's currently also involved in the fusion work. And he's happy to talk to you about eco-global fuels and about some of the Rossi work, the ECAP. So this is just an introduction to some of the things we're doing with the Bloom the Desert program. The Bloom the Desert project includes Ormes, the gold powder for agriculture purposes, and it includes the Imploder, which I'm going to show you in a minute. It also includes the study of primary water, which is deep rock water, which is more alive because it has more charge. Yeah? It's also called a captive water table. This is a project we did in Australia to bring the water back to this land at Eagle Farm, the Tiagra Airport near Byron Bay, and we remapped these dolmen to put this pent magnetic symmetry into the magnetic field of this place. See that pentagram in the center? And the magnetic map increased in charge density. So we actually fabricated the kind of stone dolmen circle that measurably affect seed germination. This is the Purify project. This gold capacitive structure creates lots of charge in the body, affects seed germination, can be used to charge rock powders. Here we're charging a rock powder with a gold 5-sided implosion pyramid. The angle of that cone is exactly this angle here in the center. If you stellate a dodecan, you make an exact 60-degree cone that becomes charge implosion. And later you're going to see that in the imploder for water, for agriculture. So this is the Purify. And here we're using the same principle to charge the yeast, the brewer's yeast, and we accelerate metabolism in the yeast 40 to 50% simply by adding a zero-power capacitor. We're proving here that we can do the same thing with capacitance charge, a cup-shaped implosive egg-like condenser. Condense, capacitance, charge compression. There's a little pine cone shape there in the electric field where you feel a little cool breeze. So the same principle is the reason Stonehenge causes seeds to grow, and the reason the Prairie device eliminated cancer, because all of life requires a centripetal field, implosion force. The electric difference between a live seed and a dead seed is quite simple. A live seed can suck in charge. That's why it's alive. A dead seed has no implosion, cannot attract charge, is not fractal, and that's why it's dead. So knowing this is life or death for you. How do you keep your aura together? Get centripetal or get dead. This is a centripetal device. This is the shungite. It's a natural phase conjugate dielectric, almost like the Philosopher's Stone John Dee and Kelly used for alchemy. The moldavite and the shungite are examples of phase conjugate dielectrics, which is to say, imploding capacitors. How romantic. Next time you want to ask your lover for a kiss, you tell her that I'm an imploding capacitor. I'm sure she will be attracted. This is another imploding capacitor here. This is in Barcelona. The last conference we did. But everyone felt the charge. This is called ecosified. And this is all gold. So I guess this might be more expensive than a Volkswagen because there's so much gold in there. But the demonstrated principle is that you make a capacitor that implodes, and you make a flame in the mind, right? So that's the geometry. You see how the geometry looks like a flame? You see the flame there? Let's play the animation of that flame here. Now do you see why we call it a flame in the mind? Let's play the animation. Here's, on the bottom left, here it is. Let's stop this here. Wait, don't control this. This is not something Bill Gates can do, but Steve Jobs can do it. You can control Keynote better than PowerPoint. Right here, I'm doing it. Bill Gates, eat your heart. So, all right. An apple looks like a donut, right? So, but you see, the point is that right here, right there, do you see a flame? Does that look like a flame to you? That's a flame in the mind, a fire, a plasma fusion event. Do you see why that's attractive? That is a flame. And that is the way flame is created. You know what? I had my first bliss experiences in the Gurdjieff School, studying sacred gymnastics of Gurdjieff in Charlestown, West Virginia, at claymont.org. And our teacher of sacred gymnastics, a French powerful spiritual teacher named Pierre Elliott, it turns out that our teacher for the sacred gymnastic, his university career was studying the physics of flame. So if you know how to make a flame, you can make fire in the mind, and you can make human bliss, and you can design sacred gymnastics, and you can make architecture, and you can cause seeds to germinate, and you can make plasma fusion containment. It's all the same geometry. Now, I want to show you one more picture. Remember when we said that here are the waves, here are the longitudinal waves coming in like this, causing compression in your mind, right? And you got an implosion in the center. And we said that's like phase conjugate optics, same thing, 4 waves mixing. But you would say, hey, that looks like a cube. That doesn't look like a dodecahedron, right? That's a cube. But here is the cube. I'm going to control this cube here. Here's the cube. Here is from the star mother. Here's how that cube gets in a dodecahedron. There's the cube. And now that cube is nested in a dodeca, right there. See the cube in the dodeca? And now, this is called embedded, and the ratio of the edge of that cube, 1.0, to the edge of that dodecahedron, 0.618. Cool to me, right? And now I'm going to do perfect nesting or perfect embedding, which is to extend the charge from each vertex of the dodeca and that's the yellow icosahedron in the star map. So now here's Q, dodeca, icosa. Just extend the wave straight out, icosa. And now I extend that straight out again, also by golden ratio, compression. Oh, there it is. extending just straight, every edge extended straight by golden ratio. Hello! Does that look familiar? That's the star mother. That's perfect nesting. That's the geometry of DNA, Earth grid, and zodiac. So you see, if you get the cube perfect, then you can embed from hex to pent into golden ratio dodeca. And that's the geometry that creates fusion, implosion, fire in the mind. You know, these plasma fields, I was going to tell you the story of fusion in the blood. We didn't finish that story. See, when the DNA turns inside out and becomes a torus like this, remember when we said that ball lightning causes telepathy? Because the plasma at the center becomes part of what I call DNA radio. DNA radio. The physics of telepathy. So whether it's ball lightning or DNA experiencing human bliss because of braiding, it ignites the fire in the blood. This is our favorite joke. We call this principle in physics is called, come on baby, light my fire. So when the fire is ignited in your DNA with the physics of bliss, then that ignites DNA radio. This is fusion in the blood. Well, I suppose we need to finish today's lecture with an ET story. Is it okay if we finish with an ET story? Is that okay with you? ET? ET, phone home. Okay. We're going to finish the story with ET. It is my humble opinion that the guy called Yahweh, Jehovah, in the Jewish tradition is probably the Anunnaki called Enlil. And Sitchin and others believe that. And Yahweh, Jehovah, taught that kosher required that the blood must be out of the meat before you eat it. Right? Now, they also taught that the Anunnaki were dying prematurely when they arrived on Earth because they couldn't handle the atmosphere. Now, we believe that the actual story of the Anunnaki is a story of what we call the Ages of Uras, U-R-A-S. The Ages of Uras is a story told by Anton Parks in the Chronicles of Cherokee. And they said that Enlil's brother, Enlil, looked like this, a frog. And the website is zeitman.net about the Ages of Uras. And he says that that culture, this Ur culture, and I want to show you the picture of the history of that term Ur. I'm doing this for a reason. Here is the Ur-An culture. Ur became An-Ur, Ungary, Ural, Uruk, Ibi-Uru, Nibiru. I don't think the translator has a job here because these words are all self-explanatory. They're the roots of the term Uru, as in Hib-Uru, Ein Sof Ur, Ursprung, Uruk, Iraq. You see the term you are. Now, if you were studying the history of the planet and you saw this term, Uras, you are you, in so many words in your language, would not you believe that in order to know the history of where we come from, we need to know who was Uru? I think, given the fact that Jerusalem, Uru Asa Elam, is a place where Uru which Uru, I believe, means of the ancient dragon blood. Uru Asa LM, Jerusalem, that's right, it's down here. I mean, Uru, ancient dragon blood, Asa, queen of, El, phase shift. So, where the queen of the ancient dragon blood made the phase shift. Uru Asa LM, Jerusalem. Probably we would not need a war over Jerusalem if we knew what it was for. A place where dragon blood can make the phase shift. So, who's this dragon blood, and what was the fire in their blood? Later, with help from Bill, we wrote a paper, and you can read the paper at fusionintheheart.com, about fusion in the blood. And specifically, we were studying the blood of our ancestors, the Anunnaki, the Uru, the Draco. We believe their roots were in Alpha Draconis, and whether you believe that or not is not important, but the chemistry of their blood is instructive. You see, our ancestors, sometimes you call them the Nephilim, fallen Draco, Anunnaki, Sumerian, whatever you call them, origins of Hungarian Draco. The chemistry lesson remains important, whatever you call them. The chemistry lesson is, from their star system, their blood was lipid-based. Lipid, L-I-P-I-D. It was an oil, lipid-based blood. And for them, they were nitrogen breathing. It's called the plague of Azoth, the plague of nitrogen. And for them, oxygen was a poison. The wars they came from in Orion were called the Oxygen Wars for a reason. It's the basis of the movie Total Recall, about the Oxygen Wars. It's those who want high oxygen versus those who want low oxygen. And if your blood chemistry is poisoned by oxygen, then obviously you don't want high oxygen. Also, for their lipid-based nitrogen-breathing blood, that the water in the blood of meat would be a poison to them. So the origin of the kosher in the Jewish tradition requires understanding Draco blood to understand where it came from. Did you know that on Alpha Draconis, the men and the women have a separate language called Emesa and Emesa? Anton Parks describes in detail. And exactly the same is true for the Australian Aboriginals. The men and the women must have a different language by law. Do you know the rules that became the marriage law in Aboriginal Australia and caste system in India? Those rules come directly from Alpha Draconis. There's so much we need to know about our ancestors to understand ourselves. Did you know that the culture on Alpha Draconis was female-dominated for a long time? And they came here with the fear of women. When I started studying in graduate school the history of Earth, I concluded the most dominant feature of the history of Earth is the fear of women. And I studied everywhere to figure out where did the fear of women came from. But you know what I found out finally is you cannot learn the origin of the fear of women without understanding the extraterrestrial origin of our ancestors. Anunnaki, Uru, Draco. That was a female-dominated culture. Well, you can see I carry on, and this would be very controversial information. And I'm not asking that you believe this without your own investigation. I do suggest you read Anton Parks. But, and you should read that paper on the blood chemistry. It's fun. Fusionintheheart.com. Thank you again to Bill on that. But here is a final point. Here's a final point. Final point I wish to make. You know when you say, come on baby, light my fire, what you're talking about is passion, right? If you don't have passion, you might as well be dead. Truthfully. So, we electrical engineers, we would like to understand a little bit about the nature of passion. Now, you can regard this as a fairy tale. I regard it as true history. But the story is that Enki, when Enki selected which of the Rh negative rhesus monkey, which of the monkey blood he was going to genetically modify to make Adam and Eve, he chose a species where he saw that monkey exhibit compassion to other animals. And he had never seen compassion in his whole life before. And that's how he selected the monkey that would be fun to work with genetically. He saw passion. Now, in order to remember this story, you can make jokes at the expense of English people, if you like. You see, the greatest concentration of Rh negative blood on planet Earth is UK, United Kingdom. What does it mean to have a stiff upper lip? This is an old joke. Sorry, Valerie, my jokes are getting old. Sorry. But a stiff upper lip is when you're in the House of Lords and you have a stiff upper lip, you can't talk very well. But the physics is that when you're a little boy, if your mother, Elizabeth from Lizard born, if your mother says, don't cry to a little boy, the biophysics is it will cause your upper lip to get stiff. True physics. So the cause of a stiff upper lip is mother says, don't cry. It means repressed emotion. It's classic neuro-linguistic programming, classic physics of emotion. So why do you have a stiff upper lip in England? Remember, we're going to make jokes about all the cultures, hopefully, but we'll just do British people for now. But the stiff upper lip means no passion, repressed emotion. What is Rh negative mean? Rh negative blood concentrated in UK means the rhesus monkey is absent. What's left? The reptilian, the Draco, right? Very intelligent, but stiff. Lack of passion. Why do they have lack of passion? Well, the rhesus monkey had passion and compassion, which Enki never saw before. The rhesus monkey blood was dominant. The reptilian blood was recessive. Very important to know. The inbreeding in the reptilians, you know, the story of the bloodlines of Europe, Holy Blood, Holy Grail. We could do the Da Vinci Code here very easily. But my point was that if your blood chemistry does not permit you to have fire or fusion in your blood, You physically do not have DNA radio, so you cannot feel other people's feelings as if they are your own. Remember that plasma fire in George Edgley's lab. Everybody around is healed. They're sucked in. It's a plasma fusion device in the sense of Holy Communion. You see what the Holy Communion is that allows me to feel you? Is if I can have that plasma fusion going on in my blood. If I don't have that plasma fusion, if I succumb to a mechanical culture, then I can't feel your feelings as if they're mine, because my blood needs to be on fire to feel the fire in your blood. And that is the physics of plasma fusion. So, you know, the end of this conference will be Bill telling you about solutions to energy from imploding technology. Bill says that every one of the devices that he is going to show you that do zero-point energy, almost all of them have one thing in common. The golden spiral and the spiral on the cone. Why? Implosive collapse. Gain energy during collapse, during fusion. So whether it's energy or architecture or physics, it all starts with one simple symmetry principle. And I promised everyone here that we would show a few pictures of how we build that into an agriculture device. This is that nozzle, that cone. In the imploder for agriculture, the same way you do fusion in the blood, I just want to do an animation of that cone, so it's so beautiful the way that cone works. Here is the architecture of the perfect implosion cone applied to agriculture. When water goes down that cone, it implodes, it gains spin density, and it becomes centripetal. And we have a dramatic effect on seed germination, on growth in agriculture. So much so that that's a successful commercial product, theimploder.com. This is the geometry of that cone. You see where we got that cone from? This is a practical application. Restored centripetal forces. Implosion for agriculture. So there are so many products that can be designed when you understand the nature of implosion. Restored centripetal force basically is our planet returning to a more ordered state. So, on that note, I urge you all to get fractal, to be like the rose. And I thank you very much. So, about what, 5 minutes?